Great question about can we see some specific examples? And one that we love to tell the story of is the American high school movement. So we're talking about the first two-thirds of the 20th century, which is characterized economically by something called the Great Compression, when the sort of the pie was being shared more equally as it grew, right, economically across the board. And one of the drivers of that was the high school revolution, the fact that within a couple of decades, all American kids started going to high school for free. And sometimes we look at that and think, well, that must have been a federal program, right? The reality of that story actually is that the public high school movement began in small towns in the Midwest. Now, this is not to say that there was no such thing as public high schools before that. There were some high schools that you could go to, but largely they were for elites. Largely they were paid. And if you went for free, it was usually because you had to be exceptionally talented or something like that. But the fact that of having a high school in your town that you got to attend for free to get a 4-year secondary education simply by virtue of living in that town was an entirely new invention. And it was something that happened as people in small towns looked around at a changed economy and said, my kid's not going to succeed if he doesn't have a secondary education, but I can't afford to send him to Boston for that. So why don't we band together, pass local tax initiatives, and create a high school that's available to everyone? I can't afford to do it on my own, but I can afford to do it if we band together. And when small towns in the Midwest began succeeding at this, other towns began seeing it, copying it, and essentially it spread like wildfire. And so within a couple of decades, almost every town in America had a free public high school. Now, of course, then there were ways in which the government got involved and that sort of a thing. But this is an important story of how one of the biggest drivers of economic equalization over the first two-thirds of the 20th century originated by innovative people in their own small towns solving a problem right outside their doorstep. So that's one really important story of how this could happen.